Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a group hug commander deck with Kenrith the Returned King as its general. Kenrith the Returned King was the buy-a-box promo card for Magic's powerful and flavorful fairy tale set, Throne of Eldraine. Through his 5-color identity, Kenny can be called upon to be the general for any commander brew imaginable. If it can be built, then he can command it. As a creature, Kenny is a 5/5 legendary human noble for 4 and 1 white mana. As a toolbox, his litany of activated abilities include: for 1 red mana, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. For 1 and 1 green mana, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. For 2 and 1 white mana, target player gains 5 life. For 3 and 1 blue mana, target player draws a card. And for 4 and 1 black mana, we put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. All of these abilities are functional and relevant, and in addition to his 5-color identity, are the reasons why Kenrith the Returned King is the single most versatile commander option in Magic. Here, we are going to sculpt the core of a Group Hug EDH deck built around Mr. Group Hug himself, Kenny. The Group Hug deck archetype generally sees its pilots supporting other players in the game through effects and abilities that provide resources to those players. The goals for a Group Hug player are to extend gameplay and focus on equity, ensuring that each player at the table has commensurate opportunities to participate throughout the game by utilizing the resources we provide. Although there are few, if any, win conditions to focus on in a group hug strategy, our philanthropy creates opportunities for in-game negotiations and returned favors, all of which can lead us to imminent victory over our charity-seeking opponents. We begin the core of this build with every Magic player's favorite part of the game, drawing cards. At the beginning of each player's draw step, Howling Mine, Kami of the Crescent Moon, and Dictate of Kruthix draws that player an additional card, while Font of Mythos draws each player 2 cards instead of 1. We're off to a great start. Also at the beginning of each player's draw step, Anvil of Bogardan has that player draw an additional card and then discard a card. Players also have no maximum hand size. We can tap Temple Bell and have each player draw a card. We can pay 2 and tap Miko Koro, Center of the Sea, to do the same. Gyre Reach Sanitarium follows suit, but has each player discard a card after drawing. Tapping Quain, Itinerant Meddler, gives each player the option of drawing a card. Each player who does also gains 1 life. We can pay XX and tap Folio of Fancies to have each player draw X cards. This artifact also gives each player no maximum hand size. It has an opponent-specific activated mill ability as well, where each opponent puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X is equal to the number of cards in their hand. Just in case any opponent needs their graveyard to be filled for some type of shenanigans. Vision Skeins has each player draw 2 cards, while Truce allows the option for each player to draw up to 2 cards. For each card less than 2 a player draws this way, that player gains 2 life. We may pay X and each player draws X cards with Prosperity. Through Selvala, Explorer Returns parlay ability, we can tap her and have each player reveal the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, we add a green mana to our mana pool and gain 1 life. Then each player draws a card. Horn of Greed draws a player a card whenever that player plays a land. Speaking of lands, at the beginning of our end step, Kenios and Tiro of Miletus draw us a card, and then each player may put a land card from their hand onto the battlefield. Each opponent who doesn't draws a card. At the beginning of each player's draw step, Rites of Flourishing has that player draw an additional card. Each player also may play an additional land during each of their turns. Jirapur Orrery mimics this exploration-like ability, in addition to having a player draw 3 cards if they have no cards in their hand at the beginning of their upkeep. We've put additional cards in players' hands. We've put additional lands on each side of the battlefield. Now let's ramp more and accelerate some mana. When Veteran Explorer dies, each player searches their library for up to 2 basic land cards and puts them onto the battlefield tapped. New Frontiers takes this benevolence up several notches. Each player may search their library for up to X basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Speaking of putting cards onto the battlefield, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Braid's Conjurer Adept allows that player to put an artifact, creature, or land card from their hand into play. Wild Evocation is similar, except the player reveals a card at random from their hand. If it's a land card, they put it onto the battlefield. If it's not a land, then the player casts it without paying its mana cost. Helm of Awakening does not ramp or accelerate mana, but it does reduce the cost of all spells by 1. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, Mana Flare, Heartbeat of Spring, and Dictate of Karametra add 1 mana of any type that land produced. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Shizuko, Color of Autumn, adds 3 green mana. Until end of turn, they don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, the Damri's Vineyard and Magus of the Vineyard each add 2 green mana. Through our capacity to hug our opponents, perhaps they will adopt this brand of charity and generosity among their opponents, particularly when considering the Join Forces mechanic. Through this mechanic, starting with us, each player may pay any amount of mana. Then, each player receives X benefits, where X is equal to the total amount of mana paid this way. Collective Voyage has each player search their library for X basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Minds Aglow has each player draw X cards. Alliance of Arms creates X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens for each player, while Shared Trauma has each player mill X cards, which is great for anyone thirsting to fill their graveyard for whatever shenanigans they have planned. Now let's close out this video with a sampling of cards that further synergizes with and enhances our group hug theme. Since we have subscribed to a group hug mentality, at times the group hugger may want or may need to embrace one particular player a little more snugly. If that is the case, then we are prepared for a longer embrace. We can tap Loran of the Third Path to have us and target opponent each draw a card. We do the same whenever Fluth is dealt damage. Secret Rendezvous has us and target opponent each draw 3 cards. Intellectual Offering has us choose an opponent, and we each draw 3 cards. It also has us choose an opponent, and we each untap all non-land permanents we control. This opponent can be the same player each time. When Wedding Ring enters the battlefield, if it was cast, then target opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, we draw a card. And whenever they gain life during their turn, we gain that much life as well. So during our turn, if we draw a card or gain life, then our Wedding Ringed opponent does the same. Scheming Symmetry lets us choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card, shuffles, and puts that card on top of it. Wishclaw Talisman enters the battlefield with 3 wish counters. We can pay 1, tap it, remove a wish counter from it, and search our library for a card and put it into our hand. An opponent then gains control of Wishclaw Talisman. This is an ability that we can only activate during our turn. This is a hospitable way to share the demonic tutoring wealth. Flux gives each player the option to discard any number of cards from their hand and then draw that many cards. We then draw a card. When Noble Benefactor dies, each player searches their library for a card and puts it into their hand. Any player may pay 2 and activate Wishmonger's ability. It gives target creature protection from the color of its controller's choice until end of turn. Glunch, the Bestower, provides rewards to 3 different players. At the beginning of our end step, we choose a player, and that player puts 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control. A second player draws a card, and then a third player creates 2 treasure tokens. If there are only 2 players in the game at a time, then no one creates any treasure tokens from Glunch. If we have 3 opponents, then we could choose each one of them as recipients of these benefits. Our compassion knows no bounds. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a group hug commander deck with Kenrith the Returned King as its general. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for crafting the core of a group hug EDH deck, in addition to providing ways to optimize this theme. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, a channel for... No, 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 no. I can't do it. I just can't do it. It's not in my nature to help my opponents win a game of Magic the Gathering. I just can't do it. I won't do it. Remember when we said the group hugger may want or may need to embrace one particular player a little more snugly? Well, that player is us. Remember earlier in the video when we said there are few, if any, win conditions to focus on in a group hug strategy? Well, in-game negotiations and returned favors aside, our win conditions are the following cards, which are ways of rewarding ourselves for the charity and philanthropy we have bestowed upon our opponents during the game. Remember all of those cards we put into the hands of our opponents? Well, whenever an opponent draws a card, Nekusar the Mindraiser deals 1 damage to that player. Nekusar also has each player draw an additional card during their draw step. Sheoldred the Apocalypse has an opponent lose 2 life whenever they draw a card, while we gain 2 life for doing the same. Remember all of those effects that give our opponents no maximum hand size? Price of Knowledge does the same, except at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, this enchantment deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, both Iron Maiden and Viceling deal X damage to that player, where X is equal to the number of cards in their hand, -4. If we choose each opponent to be a foe, then Corvath's Fury deals damage to each foe equal to the number of cards in their hand. Stormbreath Dragon does the same once it becomes monstrous. Remember all of those lands we put onto the battlefield for our opponents? Treacherous Terrain deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of lands that player controls. Remember all of the additional mana we added for each opponent? Yorlock of Scorch Thrash ushers back the return of Mana Burn, which means that if a player loses unspent mana between steps and phases, then they lose that much life. We also can pay 1 and tap Yorlock at instant speed to have each player add a black, red, and green mana. Remember all of those creatures we put onto our opponent's sides of the battlefield? Disrupt Decorum goads all creatures we don't control, which means until our next turn, those creatures attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than us if able. Perhaps we want a turn attacking with the creatures gifted to our opponents. Insurrection untaps all creatures on the battlefield, and we gain control of them until end of turn. They also gain haste until end of turn. Remember all of those cards we milled into our opponent's graveyards? Rise of the Dark Realms puts all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under our control. Remember all of those tutoring effects that allowed our opponents to search their libraries? Opposition Agent has us control our opponents while they're searching them. While an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. We may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and we may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast them. That feels so much better. Calgon's got nothing compared to our version of a group hug build. The Magic world makes sense once again. Now we are at peace, and now we can end this video. This is MTG Burgeoning. your channel for all things magic.